All right, it's a good evening, everyone, and welcome to Environmental Coffee House. As usual, I do my little spiel. Uh, it's Wednesday. Welcome, Jim and Jennifer, and we have a really good show tonight. It's probably gonna be a little unnerving, a little disturbing. There's new things. There's a new study out, a soil study, but I'm gonna let Jennifer go over that. I'm just gonna do the beginning. Welcome, everyone. Kim, thank you for being our mod as usual. And Prankish Squire's with us. Haven't
Thank
seen
you.
you in a long time. And Hoople's Cat, Gary. Hi, Gary. Jim and Tanya and Cindy, Seeley, and Phil. Phil Stone is with us, and he's in the hospital recovering from surgery, but he's hardcore and he's watching with us. Karen Reese. So it's great. Hunter Z. Hi, Hunter. It's just great to see everybody with us. And I'm going to hand it over to Jen. How are you, Jen? I'm really happy to be with you too. I am.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm great. It's a beautiful day here in Colorado. All our wet storms have passed, which is
Oh.
quite a blessing. And actually, I have a crabapple tree, and it's in bloom, and it was covered with bees the other day. So
Aren't
beautiful.
you lucky?
Yeah,
I haven't seen any
yeah.
yet. Just wasps. Seen wasps. They're already starting. Wasps, and we had a dead mouse. So maybe these goddamn seven cats are good for something in the basement, killing the mice. Um, but I haven't seen a lot of bees yet, even though I have tons of dandelions and all that. But we're going to get into this and we're going to talk about reasons
Yeah.
we might not see things. So,
Oh, yeah.
Jen, why don't you go over the articles and then
Yeah.
ba boom.
Yeah. And greetings, Jim. I don't think I greeted you
Howdy,
on the
howdy.
show. Howdy, howdy.
Always glad to be with you guys.
Okay. It's great to have you.
It
Okay,
is.
guys, we've got a good show here tonight. Tonight, we're going to be talking about neonicotinoids, or neonics, as they're kind of affectionately known. But basically, their effect on bees and their effect on the food supply and everything that runs downhill from that. So, our first one's from Wisconsin, Pollinators. And the title of the article, and it's actually a whole little pamphlet. It's a really cool pamphlet.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jim, for finding all these articles.
Yeah.
Neonicotinoids impacts on pollinators. We're going to talk about how it's a neurotoxin, among other things. Lovely. Then another article, the next one's from The Conversation. Pollinators, neonicotinoid pesticides stop bees and flies from getting a good night's sleep. So
Mm-hmm.
keeping them up all night and disorienting them. Climate change is affecting crop yields and reducing global food supplies. This from The Conversation, and a pretty potent article. That was another pretty interesting one. Then one from Common Dreams. New soil study shows pesticides destroying the very foundations of web of life. These
Mm-hmm.
troubling findings add to the urgency of reining in pesticide use to save biodiversity. Wow, no time like the present. So that's pretty much where we're going tonight, Sandy and Jim.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. I have just finished my little Facebook homework, and hopefully people will join on Facebook. So what's going on, Jim? Tell us about what's happening
Well,
up in Alaska.
Alaska. Well, mosquitoes are out. you know, they had no delay in those things coming out, and we got the big ones out right now. So as the jokes goes, they give us practice for swatting the faster, smaller ones that come out later in the summer. Um, Temperatures have been they're at least above freezing, but they've been in the 40s, and even so, with at least now over 17 hours of daylight, the snow is disappearing. A lot of it sublimates, which is a good thing. Some of it
Mm-hmm.
does melt. In about 10 days, this region of Alaska, of this latitude, will enter what we call white nights, where basically it doesn't get dark. So it'll be, for 10 weeks or so, we have white nights, which is really cool.
Okay. Well, we have rain. I drove home yesterday in a thunderstorm, hellacious rain. It's been it seems to me, Jim, like April is happening in May, at least where I am. It's and it's cold. It's cold. We had 70-degree plus days in March, and now it's only like 50 and 40s and 30s at night. I have a heater in the greenhouse. I have to.
Yeah. It's
all right.
Well, April has historically been the driest month in the interior of Alaska, except for the last 3 Aprils in a row. It's been 3 of the wettest Aprils that we have data for, that goes back to over 100 years. So things are changing, and
they are.
The fact that we had a 2-foot snowstorm basically at the beginning of April, and other snowstorms, and then we had near record cold temperatures of basically almost 50 below Fahrenheit in certain spots. This is in April. It's just like crazy tunes.
Ooh, a little bit. Sounds a little crazy. And Jen, we know what happened in Colorado. You had some snow, but you said it's nice there. So cool.
Well, yeah, things about, springtime, things flap around a lot very quickly. So it was very cold, and we did have snow. Last few days, we've had a lot of rain, which is a blessing, in all sorts of ways, because it's so dry here in Colorado. But today it's just a lovely day.
Good. Well, now we know what's going on with each other, with our weather, which always bothers us for some reason, and because it messes up things we're trying to do outside, or it just doesn't cooperate. Let's go on to the first article, and it's a good one, and we're going to actually bring this one up and look at each piece on it. So here we go. This one, and where is it? Where is the article? Oh, there it is. Sorry, I left a click. All right, so go for it, guys.
Yeah, Jim, take it away. You've done a video on this, haven't you? Some months back.
I did a video on this well over a year ago, and much to my disappointment, it really didn't get many views, but this is a problem, in my opinion, of how it impacts eventually our food supply, and anything that impacts that is, with the burgeoning number of people on the planet, is going to present problems down the line. So, as a little bit of a reminder, you can see here they have a photo of Rachel Carson, and when I first started my channel, I did a whole segment on Rachel Carson, because I consider her an extremely important scientist, and basically really the mother of the environmental movement. And of course, she wrote her well-known book Silent Spring, where she documented the use of DDT and what it was doing to raptor eggs and so forth. A lot of egg failures, and therefore chick mortalities, whether it's bald eagles, ospreys, or so forth. And now, so the DDT, thanks to her work, DDT got banned. But now, starting in about the 1990s, we have this new group of pesticides that are called neonics for short, because I think neonicotinoids is kind of a mouthful to say, and as I just demonstrated. But we have this new group of pesticides that is actually almost like species specific. They develop a different chemical that's species specific. Oh, we're going to go after a weevil, or we want to go after this kind of a quote unquote pest. And what's happening now is that we're finding out that this stuff is extremely soluble. So, and the plants take it up in every tissue. It isn't just they relegated to the roots or the roots, stems, flowers, fruits, it's just taking this stuff up. But now we're finding out that these are neurotoxins, and it is adversely impacting the pollinators. That it's messing up their circadian rhythm, so they don't know when it's, they get confused as to whether it's daytime, nighttime, what have you, and they need to know what time it is so that when they do their dances to tell the other bees where the food supply is, they do so in orientation to where the sun is in the sky. Well, if they got that all screwed up, they're going to give bad directions. Or as they fly out, they may not be able to find their way back to the hive because they're messed up. And so the neurotoxins, in addition to messing with their circadian rhythm, is just messing with their overall physiology and starting to create increased mortality. So that's the essence of what this posting is relaying. And there's a whole, you can scroll down a little bit, you can see like a summation of they're talking about sublethal effects. If I can pause there for a moment. In the old days of toxicity studies, there used to be a measure called the LD50, which was a reference to what concentration of whatever the chemical being examined would result in a 50% mortality of the population you're studying. And so LD stood for lethal dose. So lethal dose that killed 50% of the population. Well, that's kind of fallen out of favor because we've often been finding that it does take sometimes a much higher level to kill 50% of the population. But now, at the time when these studies were being done, the chronic effects were not being considered. Now the chronic effects are being considered, and now we have what's called LC50, which is lethal chronicity in 50% of the population. So, they're measuring what concentration of the chemical will cause some sort of chronic condition in 50% of the population. The chronic conditions can be very low level or can be very severe, but not necessarily what kills the organism. And what we're finding is that LC50s are usually a lot lower than LD50s, and these effects can then linger within the population, and depending on the type of toxin, can basically is a carcinogen, can cause mutations, or mutagenic agent, to be more technical, can cause changes, mutations in the genetic sequencing, which obviously would have usually deleterious effects later on. So, so that's how the history of toxic studies have gone, moved from LD50s to LC50s, and looking more at the lingering effects as opposed to a kill them and count them kind of approach.
Oh, a kill them and count them kind of approach? How
that's kind of how it used to be.
How did they count them? It was, modeling counting, or how was that done?
Probably just
with the
a
LD50,
little tray.
They would, with the LD50, they'll just sit there. Okay, we got like 7 ones that snuffed it. They'd actually look at the organisms.
Wow.
With
so
the
they
LC50,
can extrapolate.
Then you have to actually then do some sampling of the tissues, or if it's with invertebrates, you can't take blood samples. They don't have, they don't have closed circulatory system. So you take tissues. Maybe so you can do extractions out of various glands that the organism might possess, and so forth. And you can apply these studies. We're talking about insects, but you can apply these studies to, say, small mammals or even large mammals. How much, like we're finding out nowadays, that there are chemicals being put in our food that can mess with a person's endocrine system. And if you have the certain right genetic coding, it slows down your metabolism way down, and you end up packing on extra poundage that you don't want to pack on.
Terrible.
Oh,
I'm an example.
Is that my problem?
So there's just a lot of it's just an example of, and I haven't even talked about nanoplastics. That's another subject. But all these chemicals that are being put in our food, that are being used to grow the crops, applied to the crop. Many of these chemicals have now been banned in the EU. Yes. Whether it's in the agricultural practices or within the food processing procedures, a lot of them has been banned, but not here in the U.S. They continue.
It's all greed and all money. It's all it is here.
Exactly.
I just can't understand how they can have lawsuits against glyphosate and still Roundup is on the shelves. I say this every time because I have to go to the store once in a while and there it is right there. I take pictures of it. It makes me sick. And another thing I was wondering, and I know we're going a little off, but here we are. I live in a farming area, and I've never learned what they put on across the street that might leach to my property. But I noticed I have a lot less worms than where I was yesterday in central New York. I went to visit Sam Mitchell, and he was doing the garden with a new friend, Rob. I think it's Real Eyes. But anyway, they were working on the garden. They had, oh my gosh, worms galore. But it's different. I am on Marcellus Shale. It's all rock. My gardens, you have to build up. It was amazing. Hundreds of worms. I don't have them here. But I'm wondering if that's another, of course the pesticides have to be a big problem for worms and for those creatures.
Absolutely. If I can pick up on something you just mentioned, you say you don't know what's, across the streets happening over on your property. One of the major problems that the scientists are now learning about neonics is that because it's so water soluble, that they're getting into the water table, and then it can get into the aquifers and your wells and the soils as well, so that it can affect the quality of the inorganic part of the soil. And of course, if you have worms that are with semi-permeable skin, they're going to be absorbing the neonics through their skin, and that's going to have deleterious effects on them. So that is they're finding this out is sort of like an oopsie, we didn't expect this.
Yeah, right. But, it says right here, farmers and neonics. There are some who believe that key crops will fail if seeds, plants, and soils are not treated with neonics. It is true that failing crops are a concern. However, it is also a concern if there are no pollinators left to pollinate the crops. Said it right there. So I'm hoping, I guess I'll have to find out if they didn't plant last year. But I'm going to ask, what are you spraying?
Leave that right up there. Look at the bullet points with the red stars.
There we go.
This is what the neonics are doing to the bees. Interfering with the navigation system, disrupting foraging behavior, disrupting the ability to communicate, i.e. tell the others where to go, impairing their immune systems, we all know what that means, reducing reproductive success, and then the residues may be linked to fewer egg cells.
Oh, God.
So basically, this is solvable. It's solvable if we just stop using them.
That's right.
The EU has done so. Why can't we?
That's right. Yeah, well, they got right on it. There were a lot of big studies in France, and France was like, no way, no how are we doing this? And the thing is, one of the ways they use these neonics is they dust the seeds in these neonics, and only 5% of what is applied to the seeds is actually taken up by the plants. The remaining 95% of the pesticides leach into the soil and accumulate. So every planting, it doesn't go away. So it just keeps accumulating every planting cycle. So of that 5% of seed dust, neonic seed dust, that's enough, because it goes right into the flesh of the plant, the leaves, that's enough to get the bees completely poisoned by these neonics. Doesn't take much. It's in the
Doesn't
parts
take
per
much.
billion.
No.
Doesn't take much. So lethal.
Gosh.
And basically, it kind of ties in a point I just made and Jen just made about the 95% getting into the soil, which then, because it's water soluble, it easily dissolves into the water, and then it goes into the aquifers and the water table and so on. And guess what? That means eventually we are going to be ingesting them.
Eventually. I'm wondering if it's now. There's so
Oh,
much.
yeah.
I mean, think about all of the problems
Well, I'm
with.
not saying it's, I'm saying,
Yeah.
event, not like it's going to happen in the future. It's already happening. But what I
Yeah.
meant by eventually is that the process of going into the soil, eventually making its way into the aquifer, eventually making its way into the, the water table that we eventually drink up.
Entirely preventable.
It's a problem.
Yeah. Well, I thought this was a good article that you found because it's very easy to understand, and it gives it tells everything right there. They are water soluble. They can remain in the
Yep.
soil. Exactly. So, would you guys like to move on to the next one, which also was a very good article from the conversation? Of course, we're not going to read, we're going to discuss. And I also ask everybody to please put your cue before your questions for the end of the show. And we can move on. Jen, do you want to look at this one and go over it? And then you and Jim can back and forth on this one? All right.
Sure. So these neonics were banned in the EU back in 2018, and it was done because 99,000 people petitioned the UK government to support this ban, and they did it. They actually did it. So good for them, because they presented the evidence of reduced production of bumblebee queens and slashed sperm counts among male honeybees. And they showed this is definitely killing the bees. So, hats off to the EU for actually banning these things. And now the bees are having a good comeback after the banning of these neonics. Just kind of like in Silent Spring, right? DDT. There were like eagles and all sorts of birds. Their birth rates were really down because the eggshells were so thin. And then ban DDT and everything. You just got to stop poisoning ourselves and them, right?
Yeah, and this is completely avoidable if we would just do farming in a different way. Of course, there are controversies out there about organic farming. And I remember that I think I did a show on this, that people were saying that organic farming was horrible. And I do think it was I know that it was a planted article. It had to be discussion. Of course, organic might not be the answer, but stopping the use of all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
and they're
there's
discovering.
an interesting.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
No, go ahead. Finish your thoughts. I can jump in a bit.
Oh, okay, fine. They're discovering new bad things about these all the time. They're discovering it screws up the body clock and sleep of flies and bumblebees. And these guys need sleep. So can you imagine if you had a neurotoxin and you couldn't sleep and you couldn't communicate? You watch these bees, they're so communicative, so social, so purposeful, as they buzz around these beautiful blossoms. So few days in a year that these bees get to swarm a tree full of blossoms, and it's really a treasure to see them. And let's see some other things. I guess.
I'm at the study.
Jim, why don't you go ahead, Jim? I'm just kind of slogging through here, so go ahead.
Talk about the new study.
Yeah.
Well, okay. They basically report that they looked at the effects of pesticides, and basically as we were just discussing, causing issues with the circadian rhythms. It's causing neurological issues, and these, of course, not very good for the insects as a whole, because it will, if it messes up their neurology, then it's gonna have impacts on reproduction, even the making and processing of the nectar into honey. That would be adversely affected, which of course is food for the larvae as well. Something I wanted to mention, at the outset, it was mentioned that there was reduced sperm counts in the bees. Well, there's also been reduced sperm count in human males.
Yeah, that's pretty tough.
Now with this stuff being so water soluble, now this is just me just thinking off the top of my head. I'm formulating a hypothesis here. So I don't know if any studies have looked at this, but I wonder if the neonics, because it's water soluble, people are ingesting them, if this is contributing to the reduced sperm counts among human males.
It could be. Think about, and also the different things we're seeing in children. I don't think, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this. I don't think, from what I've read and what I've taken in with the vaccine deal, that it's just, or even causing autism in children, that it's vaccines per se. I do think the pesticides and the toxins that are ingested by pregnant women, by children, what's in the formula, there's got to be more to why there's increased rates in these things that are happening with children. Has to be.
No.
Can't be so simplistic, just a vaccine. Then there's probably a lot of research on that out there.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't know how dependent our food supply is on bumblebees as pollinators. 84% of the crops are pollinated, and 80% of the wild flowering plants are pollinated by bumblebees. And so these neonics pose a real threat, not only to the health of these pollinating insects, but also to the agriculture and the ecosystems that they support. So it is a serious, serious thing.
Absolutely.
Well, would you like to go on to talk about the rest of this? It's got the environmental impact also. I mean, it's a pretty good one, like usual with these articles. We can go down further and just discuss the environmental impact. It might be a little bit of a repeat, but go for it. Whoever wants
it
to.
basically says that if it messes up the circadian rhythm, they won't know when to sleep, when to be awake. Their orientation to the sun will be compromised, so thus they may not be able to effectively communicate the direction to a food source. So it will impact how the bees then go about pollinating other plants, and that just has really, bad consequences, as has been mentioned here. So the interesting thing here is they talk about bees forming memories while they're sleeping, and presumably those memories are where to go.
Too.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Pretty wild.
And so if their circadian rhythms being messed with, they may not be able to form those memories, and they kind of go, "Hey, where do we go? I don't know." It'll be one of those kind of deals where if they get a good night's sleep, their brains form the memories, and then when they wake up in the morning, it says, "Okay, gang, we're off in this direction," and off they go.
Yeah. So with this colony collapse disorder going on, there's kind of a shortage of bees. So one thing they started doing was they started importing bees from where? Australia. right?
Oh,
And
wow.
so all of a sudden you've got these Australian bees, from the southern hemisphere and they have like a different climate, a different, season. So they're either coming from summer to winter or vice versa, right? They just fly them in on these big pallets on these jets and, they check them out, make sure they're healthy, and they let them loose, these very, very confused bees. So I don't really know
There's a
what the
problem with that.
effect of that. Yeah.
There's a problem with that, and that is the difference between the northern southern hemisphere. In the northern hemisphere, the sun goes around the sky to the right. It's to the left in the southern hemisphere. So that could totally screw up their orientation.
No
If they
doubt.
get
They
things
would be
backwards.
extremely confused. Yeah. We do so many things to mess things up. Like I was watching a movie which Sandy is going to include in the show notes.
Yeah.
Probably a lot of you have seen it. It's called The Vanishing of the Bees. Very good. It's on YouTube. So Sandy's going to include this link in the show notes. And it's such a profound and poignant movie. And it's got all kinds of awards. I think it came out probably, what do you think, Sandy, a decade ago or something like
Yeah,
that?
I have to pull it up again. I probably could pull it up and show you guys, but it
Yeah.
I'll show you what it looks like, and then we can check it out, in the show
Yeah.
notes.
But
Yeah.
it's really good to see. That's where I learned about the Australian bee
Hmm.
imports. Unbelievable.
Wow.
Australian bee imports. It just doesn't. I can't pull this up right now. It just doesn't
Well,
seem, right. But and then here
it's
we go, Jim. You wanted to segue to the climate change. The next one we would segue to climate change is affecting crop yields and reducing global food supplies because it goes right. It goes right from we're destroying with pesticides and neonics, using neonics, to climate change is having an effect. And here we have one big, just great big clusterfuck, right?
Yeah, I have done a few videos on this topic, and basically there are two major misconceptions out there. People basically say, well, warmer planet and more CO2, that'd be great for plants, right? They can suck down all that CO2. It's
The
warm for them.
deniers.
They can go this, that, and the other thing. And it's just like, well, plants, like any other organisms, have a preferred temperature range. And the great majority of the plants that we grow for agricultural purposes are what's referred to as a C3 plant. I'm not going to get into the biochemistry. It has to do with an intermediate chemical on the way to making glucose, the sugar molecule. There's an intermediary step that there's a carbon compound that contains 3 carbons, and C3. Well, those plants prefer temperatures 85 degrees Fahrenheit or less, because any temperatures above that, then they start having excess transpiration, which is water vapor loss through the stomata, and they wither and die. Now, there are some agricultural plants, corn being the best example of what's called a C4 plant, where you have a 4-carbon intermediary compound. These plants do better in a warmer situation, such as high 90s, even to the low hundreds. So they can do okay, but if it gets too wet for them, then they don't do okay. So what we're seeing here is that because of the warming temperatures, it's getting too warm for a lot of these C3 plants. The crop yields are drastically reducing.
yeah.
In addition to the crop yields reducing, the crop that is harvested has a reduced nutritional quality to it. So it's actually like less calories contained, or it contains less of vital ions and etc. So we're seeing reduced yields, and the yield that is harvested has reduced nutritional quality. Couple that with the ever-growing number of people on the planet, and you have to keep feeding more and more people, you got reduced yields. You're poisoning the pollinators. The yields that do come out have reduced nutritional value. Can we spell disaster in the making?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Africa is being especially hard hit. I've been watching some videos today about Nigeria, and Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, and they've been having severe food shortages. And with, like most African countries, about half the population is under the age of 15, which means they're not really using birth control. It also means they're on a fairly steep incline, So while Nigeria used to be a pretty decent little country, probably back in the 70s or something like that,
remember.
the population has gone up quite a bit. And the food calorie intake has gone down in a lot of African countries. And in addition to Nigeria, other African countries that have reduced caloric consumption is Malawi, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. And even some rich industrialized nations such as Australia, France, and Germany also have some reduced caloric intake. So it is hitting Africa harder than it is hitting the Western world for the most part.
And that's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. Yeah. It's been hard hit over there, and it is a tragedy. We had, where I lived and grew up, we had the Nigerian embassy right up the street from our house, so we made friends with all the kids, and they're just such beautiful people. And no country deserves the treatment and corrupt political regimes and all of the different things that we've done as the United States to harm these countries for mining and all that. But of course, I'm going off key here. I'm going off topic. I just
there's another troubling aspect to the warming climate. People say, "Oh, more CO2, plants will draw that down." Well, new studies are coming out indicating that with the warming temperatures, they're not drawing down the CO2. The plants are getting stressed out, and this would be trees, grasses, what have you. But what's happening is the plants are switching to respiration. They're not doing photosynthesis. So that means instead of drawing down CO2, they are adding CO2 because they're using oxygen to respire. So they're drawing down the oxygen from the atmosphere, and then they're respiring more CO2 into the atmosphere.
Oh, that definitely gets this flush of the day. That gets the flush of the day, Jim. Gotta interrupt you. Sorry, but that one is worthy. Sorry. Flush it away. It's worthy. Oh, my gosh. Okay.
Because plants normally at night do respire. It's no sunlight, so they're going to take the glucose they made during the day, metabolize it, and wait for the sun to come up. Well, with the warming temperatures, even during the daylight, they're sucking down the oxygen from the atmosphere and adding CO2. And when you got the decline, we're already measuring declining. Sorry, I have to throw in the ocean bit, but you're already measuring declining in the phytoplankton. Phytoplankton supply 55-80% of the atmospheric oxygen. So they're not adding oxygen to the atmosphere. Land plants are sucking down the oxygen, adding CO2. And we're already measuring a decrease in the oxygen content, by the way, in the atmosphere.
That's
20%.
Completely. Now. That's going down and down and down. Every year, it's a little less oxygen. It's not a good trajectory, not a good trend.
It's actually under 20%.
Is it? Gosh. And the Amazon has turned into a carbon source now.
Right.
It's not actually a carbon sink any longer. And it's, as they chop down more trees, the Amazon is not going to be able to hold the water to manufacture the water, because the Amazon actually is a water manufacturing machine, ecosystem, and they've just kind of riddled it out in so many ways, and it's not contiguous, healthy forest any longer. So it's become a
We have
carbon
taken
source.
two
Not a
major,
carbon
yeah, we have taken two major regions, the Amazon and the Arctic, and we have changed them from carbon sinks to carbon sources.
That's right.
Forever. I mean,
Very scary.
until the end. There's a video in this, and I'm wondering if you guys can hear it if I play it. It was a 3-minute video in this article about transforming food systems under a changing environment. I think I might give it a try. What do you think, guys? I want to see if you guys can hear it, we'll play this. I've had a little trouble with getting one of my
thought it was
sound
more of a
things up.
slideshow, but I could be
This
wrong.
one? Can you guys hear it? But only if you guys can hear it. My system audio. Okay, here. There we go.
Yeah, I can hear it.
All right.
I can hear the sound.
Let's watch it.
I thought it was more of a slideshow. I could be remembering this incorrectly.
Climate change is posing a huge risk to global agriculture, and that is why we need decisive action from both sides, the production and the consumption side, as well as policymakers and international organizations to strengthen the resilience of smallholders to deal with the upward trend of global hunger.
Game-changer technologies are available for farmers to improve the quality of the food they grow, provide access to markets, build resilience to climate change, and improve their livelihoods.
One of them is stress-tolerant seeds. Second, we have weather information services to ensure that farmers have an idea, a forecast of the weather, and make informed decisions in terms of their farm operations.
Progress is painfully slow. We have to transform the food system in a decade, and at this pace of change in the negotiations, you just can't see it happening.
Currently, governments across the world, they give about $500 billion a year in direct and indirect subsidies to agriculture. Those do not generate necessarily the best environmental outcomes. So redirecting those agriculture public support programs will really go a long way, to mainstream and scale up climate smart agriculture.
Because no one is as vulnerable to climate change than the world's farmers are. But nobody can also do more about it in a shorter space of time and cheaper than the world's farmers can.
All right. Well, that it was interesting, and you know what? It brought up a question for me, and my question was: are drought? Wait, I have it here. Are stress-tolerant seeds a problem? We didn't go. I'm wondering now, how are they created? How did they make them? Are they genetically modified? Obviously, but are they toxic, or is this a good use of the science that's made these seeds?
I guess
That
it
I
depends
don't
what
know.
stress. I'm not a geneticist or a botanist, but I wonder, it depends on what stresses they were being bred for. Was it to endure drought or endure high temperature or both, or maybe endure being wet a lot more? So I guess it depends on what they had in mind.
Okay. Well, my question is because when things are modified, they obviously are genetically modified, but it's not always the evil genetically modified. It depends. So I'm just now interested in the research about these seeds. So that's why I showed that, because it was something different and it was included in this article. So,
yeah.
And you see,
And
that's what people are trying to do.
And these pesticide companies are very, very tricky because they continually try to greenwash their products, and they argue for the use of pesticides in regenerative or climate smart agriculture. And, pesticide reduction must be a key part of combating climate change in agriculture. There's just no doubt about it.
It comes down to profits as always, unfortunately.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, we do have another article that I found this at the end, when we go back and forth, we have a chat and we all talk in this to get our stuff in a row. And I'm going to pull this up to see if either one of you would like to take a little spin on this one, because it's brand new. And new soil study shows pesticides destroying the very foundations of the web of life. So we've gone to pesticides and then to climate change and back to pesticides. And I was talking about the worms. And this is a new study published in Frontiers of Environmental. Yep. And they're calling it Bugpocalypse. Do you guys want to, maybe we could go over this one a little more than we did with the other one, since this one's brand new. Jen, you want to start?
I'll go ahead and I'll paraphrase it. I'll just kind of preface it with this is a more lengthy article. It's a little bit more detailed. So I'll do my best to paraphrase it so it's not so deadly boring, right?
But deadly boring.
Well, because if you read it, sometimes people go,
Yeah.
But basically, there's a journal called Frontiers in Environmental Science, and they have raised the alarm about the role that agricultural pesticides play in what scientists call the bug apocalypse, which is the extinction of bugs. Poor bugs, poor us, poor Earth, poor everything. And they're calling, of course, for stricter regulations across the U.S. This came out of the University of Maryland and also an organization called Friends of the Earth U.S. and the Center for Biological Diversity. And this is the largest and most comprehensive review of the impacts of agricultural pesticides on soil organisms ever conducted. That's big. Wow. That's really big. Yeah, that's huge.
Holy crap.
Yeah, it really is. And the analyzed pesticides pose a grave danger to invertebrates. So, bugs, worms, all sorts of things that are essential for anything that doesn't have a backbone, that are essential for biodiversity, healthy soil, carbon sequestration, to fight climate emergency. What they've seen is below the surface of fields covered with monoculture crops of corn and soybeans, pesticides are destroying the very foundations of the web of life. Wow.
Horrible.
Like
everything.
This is
like everything.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and we try not to be.
Symptom. It's another symptom of overshoot.
Collapse.
Those of you that didn't see our show on Sunday with Michael Dowd, we talked about overshoot and all its symptoms. So this is yet another symptom of overshoot. And it's the way it's going down, it's ugly. So study after study indicates the unchecked use of pesticides across hundreds of millions of acres each year is poisoning the organisms critical to maintaining healthy soils. The regulators have been ignoring the harm to these important ecosystems for decades, and they probably will continue to because they are fully driven by profit and money. But there is a huge effect of pesticides on the invertebrates that have egg, larval, or immature development in the soil. So they're really digging down into the soil, and they're looking at ants, beetles, ground nesting bees, and earthworms. They found that 70% of the tested parameters showed negative effects. So everything's kind of like doing worse than it used to do, which is not good. The level of harm that we're seeing is much greater than they thought it would be. Soils are incredibly important, clearly. How pesticides can harm soil invertebrate gets a lot less coverage than the pollinators, mammals, and birds. So very few people look at dirt, but dirt is it's the foundation of life.
It's critical.
You know? I don't see them mentioning
learning.
Yeah.
It's important
and the porosity
for being a gardener.
of the soils.
Yeah.
You know, worms, beetles, all sorts of things that dig in the soil. That is what makes the soil porous. So when the rain comes, the rain can get into the soil, plump it up. Earthworms are getting hit. And bees actually nest in the soil, and bees are getting hit. So there's a real need for sweeping changes. It's not just one or two pesticides that are causing harm. It's really across the whole class of chemical poisons.
Yeah.
And there's a tweet from Bug Life, and they say the pesticides we are applying are assaulting the fertility of the animals that live in the soil. If we want to protect healthy soils, we need to take soil organisms into consideration when deciding if a pesticide is safe to use.
And I want more soil organisms in my garden. And I will do anything.
Well, here's a thought.
Yes.
Here's a thought. Since, pesticides pretty much killed a lot of things, how about we just ban them totally? Be done with it.
Oh, yeah. I would give that one an applause. We should ban pesticides.
Yeah.
And then but you know that because of so many people relying on the industrial food system, is it possible without pesticides that have been created to feed the world?
The answer is no, because simply put, there's too many humans on the planet. It's an example of overstressing the available resources, which of course are finite. You cannot keep putting more and more people and expect to feed them all. It's just not going to, the mathematics just does not add up. I mean, to be quite blunt, we're about 8 billion people now. The current capacity, depending on what study you look at, is between 100 to 600 million people.
It's a lot. A lot.
And so we're at 8 billion. So if you want to take the 100, which is what I see a lot of, that's 80 times the number of people that above the carrying capacity. That is putting an extreme pressure on the system, and because the pressure to come up, create the food to feed all these people, is why they resort to such practices as pesticides and other industrial agricultural, where you have, as Jen mentioned earlier, monocrops. You're just growing one type of thing. And you get something that hits that crop there, you get crop failures. And there's some concern that there might be some crop failures hitting pretty hard around the world. I heard Ukraine was one of them, and up into Russia as well. So that whole section of the eastern mid-Eurasian continent. But you just, all these pressures that we're putting on to try and create more and more food, and then as we discussed earlier, what we're getting is lower yields and reduced quality.
It's very
This
sad.
is not sustainable, people. That's the blunt truth of it. This is just not sustainable.
So then we need
Yeah.
some activism. Well, there are activists on this front, big time. I mean, there's a lot of people that are
Oh,
that
yeah.
are, but I still don't know if it's enough to is it enough to fight the corporatocracy takeover of everything? I mean, yes, we love scientists, but then there's scientists that are developing all this stuff. Do they feel like they are doing the right thing? Do they understand, that these pesticides that they've come up with, they think they're good? They must think they're good, right?
Well, they just didn't look at it very deeply, and they didn't understand how vital soil organisms are to food production and also for battling the climate crisis itself. And these soil organisms, these creatures, and the threats that they face are not being paid adequate attention to on a global scale. It wasn't even understood. It was just like, we're so stupid and we just do stuff and we think it's all going to be good and we just make it so much worse.
Yeah, there you go.
Soils are not only the foundation of agri-food systems,
Yep.
where 95% of the food we eat is produced, but it's also their health, their biodiversity, and central to our efforts to end hunger and achieve sustainable agri-food systems. So
I put this piece up because it perfectly sums it up. Pesticide companies are continually trying to greenwash their products, arguing for the use of pesticides in regenerative or climate smart agriculture. And that was a co-author, a senior scientist at Friends of the Earth. This research shatters that notion and demonstrates that pesticide reduction must be a key part of combating climate change in agriculture. And that's a perfect way, because we've been an hour. It is a perfect way to bring up the rear and kind of end this, because it's got to change. And Jim, maybe you want to give a short wrap up with Jennifer of what we've gone over. Both of you can do that.
Neonics are killing the pollinators. We need pollinators to pollinate our crops. Climate change is drastically adversely impacting our food, the yield, the quality of the food. Pesticides are also, they're harming the soils as well, and therefore compromising the soil, which means compromising how the plants will grow. And then when you get the climate change is affecting and changing because of changing jet streams, what have you, but the different temperature regimes as well as different precipitation regimes, that's added stress to the system that is going to also adversely impact crop yields and production.
Jen, and then we'll do a couple of questions. And Jen?
Yeah. Well, farming practices are basically killing the insects, and they're killing the organisms in the soil, and we have an insect apocalypse on our hands. And we, just like we usually do, didn't look at things very deeply before we went and we poisoned everything. And these poisons are cumulative, and we've got ourselves a big mess on our hands, and not really sure I see a way out of this mess.
Well, I know Jim, who's with us, Jim and Tanya, they are out there every Friday in Gettysburg, and they are activists, and the way is pressure, and who knows, how do we get people to do it? But that's a whole other show. So
I think what this reflects is people just focusing in on one aspect and not looking at the whole total picture. We see this in just about any application. You get so narrow-minded in what you're studying that you forget to look at the big entire total picture. And we need to see more of that kind of science looking at the total picture, as opposed to just, well, we need to get rid of this type of bug because it eats too many plants. And then say, well, but if we do, instead of just saying, okay, great, we got this chemical, we'll just say, next question is, what will this do to the ecosystem? The other organisms, the watershed, the inorganic aspects of the soil as well. And too many, this is my major criticism of geoengineering, is that there are unforeseen things you just can't account for.
Yeah.
There you go.
And, we can see the result of our efforts of this bug apocalypse. I can remember when I was a child, and I'm sure all of you guys can too, if you're old enough, that when you'd go in the summer, drive across the Midwest or wherever there were a lot of bugs, your windshield would just be caked. You'd have to use this stuff, you'd have to stop and wash your windshield off. Not so anymore, and
that was
they're
a big
just
thing
not
on
they're not the levels of insects there used to be.
Yeah, back in the day. I know riding my motorcycle, I used to be, I would just open my mouth and go like this, and either a bee would fly in or my teeth would be full of bugs. And it's a buggy thing riding a motorcycle. Well, let's do a little comment. Let's read some comments before we end. And Gary had a question. Are we seeing that climate change is causing environmental degradation? Absolutely. Both of you.
No question about it.
And it's not just agriculture. Go anywhere on the planet. I mean, we're seeing, humans have done geoengineering for over a couple of centuries, and the results are in, and the results are not good.
Okay, let's see. I want to pull up Voids. He had a comment. Quote: biopiracy of climate resilient crops. Gene giants are stealing farmers' innovation of drought resistant varieties. Farmers breadcrops resistant climate extremes. So I think what he's saying, it's a quote, so it must be from something, that there are different varieties of. They're breeding them for flood resistant, drought resistant, all the seeds are being, so it is all genetically modified.
The salt resistant is an important one, because as the aquifers get drained down, we're seeing brine intrusion, and which would normally kill the crops. But if you infuse an ability for the crops to tolerate a brackish salinity, that can offset that aspect.
Yeah, well, that's going to affect all those rice paddies down in the Mekong Delta, Vietnam, Cambodia.
Yes,
that's right. That's just another whole layer here.
Yeah, spot on point. Yeah.
Expanding Mind. Hello, Expanding Mind. I have a question for Jim. How much ice in a perfect storm scenario could melt in 1 year? I have an idea, would like to know yours and compare. Maybe Expanding Mind, that's a different show. I don't know, Jim.
Perfect
do you want
storm ice.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure really what ice we talking about. Sea ice, glacial ice.
Maybe because you do talk, but
I'm not following.
I put it up.
Getting at.
Well, thank you, Expanding Mind, for the question. We'll have to look at your question and maybe use it for another show. And our Raza, we all love Raza Eco. He's newly quite annoyed by neonics. He is newly. Oh my goodness.
You see why I say they just say neonics. It's just easier.
Yeah. Well, I took a video. I Googled, how do you pronounce neonicotinoid? And we listened to it like 4 times.
It's like a 7-syllable word, right?
Yeah. Neonicotinoid. Yeah.
I mean, okay.
It's a word.
I mean, take a look at remove the neo. what do you have? You have nicotinoids, nicotine.
Nicotine, which it is related to nicotine chemically. Neo, so
Wow.
that's easy. Neo, nicotine, noids, right? Sort of.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
We're
basically what
always
we've
trying to
been
pronounce.
discussing.
yeah. Always trying to pronounce. And Keith is his comment was of particular concern is the link between the neonic use and honeybee colony collapse disorder. Of course, and that was what we went over earlier. Oh, here's one from Phil. Phil, recuperating our friend Phil. We love Phil and Susan. Question: is DDT banned worldwide or just here?
Well, that's a good question. I don't even think I
didn't
know
look
the
it up.
answer. I would,
Well, we'll
my
have to find
gut
that.
level reaction would say it's probably banned worldwide, but who knows? Maybe somebody can tell us.
Somebody use Ecosia or Google.
I think
tell us.
probably definitely in the U.S. and Canada, probably across Eurasia, like European and so on. I'm not sure about, say, in Africa. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right.
either.
Let's
Well,
see.
something can be looked up.
Yeah, we could do that. Psychopaths and sociopaths always rise to the top of the corporate ladder. That is why CEOs could cut salaries and give themselves bonuses. That was when we were talking about, the corporate bullshit that goes
is
on that
so true.
allows this stuff.
That is so true.
And then Hunter
You
had
know,
an
and
interesting.
that's-
Oh, sorry.
Well, that's what I mean. That's been my observation for a long time. It's rare to find people who get into like really senior management, like, senior vice president, stuff like that, to get even just to make that journey to get above all those people. You have to be kind of cutthroat,
Well,
on
they
some
say
level.
the CEOs are psychopaths or narcissists. I've never
Oh,
been one.
yeah, totally.
And some of them become
so-
politicians.
Yeah, well, I think it's a prerequisite. Don't you think it's a prerequisite? All right, so Hunter had an interesting one. I don't know if we can answer it, but why is Zika not the threat it was predicted to be? Those mosquitoes are still out there. Maybe it wasn't politicized.
Well, I like the avatar.
Yeah,
Blue,
yeah. He's from
blue
New
octopus
Zealand.
there.
He's a lovely person. And thank you for everybody also for helping us, by the way, with our Buy Me a Coffee fundraiser. All of you out there, I thank you. I don't want to forget that. So I think I got most of the questions. There was a question about the range that honeybees could fly, and I believe that Hoople's cat answered that. I'm going to pull that up. So the range was, and let's see, honeybees usually fly within the range of 1 and 6 kilometers, but sometimes go up to 13.5 kilometers. In fact, some honeybees go as far as 20 kilometers from their hive. Those are the ones that like to take a walk on the wild side, Yeah. Doot, 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 doot. Those are the wild side honeybees. All right, let's see here.
Those must be the scouts looking for new food sources.
Yeah, actually, I thought you'd know. I did. I really did. Okay. Hi,
So it goes to show the
unapologetic
importance that
vegan.
if their circadian rhythm is messed up, their sleep is messed up, their neurology is messed up, they're not going to be able to go 20 kilometers or make their way back. So it's obviously a serious problem.
Very serious. Well, I think this has been a good show, guys. I do like, I think we've covered some important things. The new studies, the links are in the show notes, and it went so fast. It went so fast.
Did.
It was
Very fast.
Yeah.
This show was an hour and 15 minutes
I know.
almost, and
It's like,
I don't know where the time went.
well, I hope all of you learned something that you may not have known. We encourage you always to go look at the show notes because of the links. And if you're interested in more, that's what you really should do. And anybody with a ending, say goodbye, ending little thing? I said my piece. Thank you all, because
Bye,
I really
Jim.
do appreciate
Always a
everything.
pleasure.
Peace.
All right, guys, then I am going to bid you adieu, and hopefully we will be here on Friday night. I am not sure. I haven't planned a thing yet, but I'm going to say bonsoir. Good evening, everybody. And Rich, Diana, thank you again. Bonsoir.
Bonsoir.